Every single time I talk to them, they have two big questions. Okay, when do I get sponsors? And how do I get 1 million listeners? And I go, those are the two wrong questions. That's the problem. If you are beating your head against the wall over and over and over again, it's 99% of the time, it's because you're asking the wrong question.
Welcome to Be Bold Branding, where we discuss the power of differentiating yourself through your own unique story and standout personal brand. If you have a podcast and you want to take it from a side hustle to a money-making machine, stop everything you're doing right now and tune in for the next half hour. We're talking with Josh Tapp, the host of Apple iTunes Top 50 marketing podcast called The Lucky Titan. He's turned podcast monetization on its head. And today he's going to share the bold moves he made that got him to the front of the pack in podcasting.
Josh, welcome to Be Bold Branding.
Hey, that honestly, I'm going to steal that intro. I'm trying to write it down over here going, wow, they're showing their skill here as the brand people, guys.
Awesome. I'll just copy paste and send it to you, Josh. No worries.
Please do. Yeah.
we aim to please.
Success.
Well, first off, thank you for coming. You've turned into a good friend, and for the audience out there, we've got to know Josh pretty good lately, and hopefully you're going to get to know him a little bit better now. So let's get right into it.
Yeah.
Josh, I'm an open book, guys. You just ask away. It's
all right.
Off limits.
Okay. Was there a specific person in your life that you would credit to shaping who you are, who you've become?
Many individuals for sure. I would say the first one for me would be my father. So I'm actually a 6th generation entrepreneur. A lot of people say, "Oh, that was to your benefit. Then you already had all this training and everything." The truth is, the last 2 generations before me were not very successful financially. My dad is still an amazing human. Still love him to death. When I was 11 years old, he was in this network marketing company that was selling leadership information, and he's like, "Josh, I'm going to make you a deal." It was for me and all my brothers. I'm one of 6 boys, and 2 of them work for me. So that's always fun. Getting to boss your brothers around at work is even more fun. But he came to all of us and he said, "Hey, if you'll read like a leadership, personal development, business book, I'll pay you." I can't remember what it was, like $30, $60 something or something. And it was actually a lot of money at the time for me. And I'm like, because he owned a construction company. I've been doing construction for years. Literally from the time I was 6 years old, I was helping my dad do construction. And he always paid us pretty well. But if you know anything about me, I hate manual labor. I hate it. It's just not my thing. I don't really love doing it. And when he said, "Hey, you can make money by being lazy and reading books," I said, yes. And then funny enough, I go into his office and I find this book, which you can assume why I grabbed it. It's the skinniest book. If you're watching this, it's the skinniest book on his bookshelf. It's called The Richest Man in Babylon. This literally shaped everything I do still that I do today comes from that book. My dad knew that was going to happen. Obviously, that was his little sneaky ulterior motives. And so I got really into reading and into auditory learning, especially once podcasting came around. And so I can honestly say my dad set me on the path, but there were a lot of individuals who've done a lot to shape it for me as well. So that's a great question.
Yeah, well, good. I'm so glad you got to The Richest Man in Babylon. I hate that I did not bring my copy of it. Because I too have read it, although I did not have the forethought or anybody ahead of me to even point me in that direction at 11. So I was the first time I met you, I think, or within the first 3 times, you had mentioned how profound this book was. And I was like, who even knows about that book? Like, that's unbelievable. But I read it at 19. And it also changed my life. So I was a little bit behind you there as far as the timing, but it was still great. Arcad, the section of saving money is really fantastic. I love that part. I try to live by those principles every day, and they shaped me even back then. But you were shaped by a little bit different, right? I remember what you told me was your favorite section or one that stood out to you, right?
Yeah, that book in particular, we don't even have to go down this rabbit hole if you don't want to, but I love telling this story because I think a lot of people, when they read books, they're like just trying to glean the surface level stuff. And the first time I read it, it was the surface level stuff. But when you actually break it apart and you see the wisdom that if you read between the lines, he talks about in this book. So if you haven't read this book, it's actually a fictional story about entrepreneurship, basically, set back in, I don't even know what age. You're going to have to help me on that one, Michael. But
I can't remember either, honestly.
Ancient history, right? But what's so intriguing about it is that the story basically shows how he built a platform and he owned the ecosystem. That's how he became successful. And he doesn't even implicitly say that. It's just if you look at it, he basically makes a business that owns the currency. He basically built the Federal Reserve, right? Which I thought was so intriguing because I'm like, man, that's where the money's at. Because at the time, the first time I read it, I'm like, oh, this is great. A lot of good principles and everything. But I reread it a few years ago and that really stood out to me. I'm like, that's what I've been doing wrong. I've been the one out here going and just being the next agency, starting the next course, starting the next program that was going to change the world. And I was going to be a billionaire with it. And somehow I never made more than $100,000 and I couldn't figure out why. And then when I had that shift going, oh, you can actually have a platform, have something where you own the ecosystem. You can monetize pretty much every angle of that ecosystem. You make a lot more money, guys. I can tell you that much right now.
Yep. I'm glad you pointed that out because that was good. And when you pointed it out, I was like, I need to find that. And so I've revisited the book myself. I haven't finished it. I've been busy reading some other stuff, but I picked the book up again, and I'm gonna put it back on my yearly list of books that I read. The revisit. So
yeah.
It's literally like an hour and a half read. I think. I mean, it's like
it's pretty quick.
130 pages. Yeah,
pretty quick. Yeah. You can get through it.
Well, I love your term ecosystem because we talk about that a lot. We talk about how a personal brand is an ecosystem, right? It has all these parts and pieces you never really even think about, and they all have to come together to make this full and total brand. It's not just about a photo or logo or tagline or things like that. It truly is an ecosystem. Yeah. And I think that's one thing that you've taught us. So in full disclosure here, we're not just friends of Josh's, we're also clients, right? And we're in his mastermind, and he has grown our podcast tremendously. He's the reason we're in pretty consistently in the top 3% global ranking of podcasts. So thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
We appreciate that.
That testimonial for you.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. I'll pull that clip out for you too. I mean, I'm just going to do your job for you here.
Yeah. Today. I love when people do that for me.
So tell me, at what point did you have that epiphany that, podcasting, that's where I'm going to make a huge impact? What happened that day?
Yeah. So let me tell you this. It was one of those where you look back and you go, you idiot. Why didn't you know this earlier? Right. I've been listening to podcasts since their inception back in 2004, 2005. I had my little iPod, I connected it to the internet, and I realized that they had these podcast things. And I realized for myself, because I always thought I wasn't successful. And honestly, up until about 2 years ago, I thought I wasn't successful enough because it's like this thing in the industry of business that you have to wake up at 4 a.m. and you've got to read books. And if you don't read a book a day, you suck at life, right? And I used to just think I'm never going to be successful because I just can't binge read business books. I have to sit down, read a chapter or two, and I think on it and I go apply it usually. But what I realized, I'm actually an auditory learner. And when I learned that, even in college, that helped me a ton in college because I wouldn't even go to lectures. Oh, excuse me. I don't know if I should say that's not kosher or not, but I would listen, like they'd record them. I just listened to them and I'd retain way more through listening. And so they were kind of already ingrained in me. And it was really funny. I can't remember what year this was. Probably 5-6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago at this point. My business had just tanked. We had one of our biggest clients pulled out. They were like over half of our revenue. And we had overperformed at a Facebook ads agency. I had overperformed our way out of business. They're like, hey, great. We have enough leads to last us another 2 years. I'm like, wait, what? And they fired me because we overperformed. That was like the realization. I'm like, I'm in the wrong business. P.S. You'll never catch me back in the Facebook ad space. So very, very difficult business to be in. Anyway, so I had that moment. I went to a mastermind I had previously paid for. And I'm just kind of brooding. I'm just like, you could just tell I'm like sitting back, like barely listening. And I was sitting next to this guy who at the time, I didn't really know him, but he's become a mentor of mine. He leaned over and I'm not going to say exactly what he said. But he's like, basically, what's wrong with you kind of thing. And I was like, and I just I spewed to him and he's like, Josh, I've been watching your stuff for years. Why don't you just start a podcast? And I'm like, yeah, why don't I start a podcast? So I went into that realm, but about a year later, I realized I could directly track all of the sales we had made in our company to my podcast and to all of our success that we had over the next year, because that was the first year we really started being successful. And that was that moment, and then it was a matter of backtracking and saying, how did I make that work? How do I duplicate it? How do I replicate it? And that's honestly what ultimately pulled me into the podcasting space. And if I were to tell you right now, like what most people don't know is they come to me wanting podcasting. I'm actually the joint venture guy. I'm the one who's constantly just talking about like merging companies. And I've talked to Tanya and Michael about this before many times. Where it's like merge companies and do long-term strategies together. But podcasting is just the easiest vehicle to do so. So anyways, there's a lesson there read between the lines on that one, guys.
Yeah. Well, that's why
good takeaway.
That's why your introduction talks about turning your podcast into a money-making machine, right?
Yeah.
Because most people out there, and we know this because we explored this before we found you. It's like, okay, we maybe sponsorship, right? Or maybe ads, running ads. Well, ads are like, half a pennies on the dollars, not even pennies on the dollar, right? It's like half pennies. And so it's not even worth your time to even set up the system for it, or, have something on your show that has no context to what you do or teach or share anyway. So when you came along, and I'll let you share, what you guys do differently, it truly was an eye opener. And I had spent, actually, you probably don't know this, but I had spent, before BrandFace was launched, 18 years in the media industry. And part of my job was to put together sponsorships and partnerships and things like that. Wow. So it was a natural to me. And it's one of those, why didn't I think of that? Right.
Yeah. I live in this industry. Yeah.
Right. And we know joint ventures, right? But not in the way that you guys are doing it.
And let me add to the setup for the foundation for this, Josh, before we unleash you. Right.
Yeah.
We looked at podcasting as a way to try to follow up with people that told us no. Right. That's the reason we even got into it. And we thought that we can show other people, maybe have other people that have success, and then that'll show the people that, hey, social proof, if you will, and maybe they'll come on. And so then we realized we sucked at it. We were terrible. So we started making it better and trying to improve upon it. And then we realized that if we had a chance to talk to people and give them our spiel, what we do, we were most successful at selling our product. So then we said our next evolution is, okay, let's get on other podcasts that are talking to our ideal customers. The problem was there was no platform for that at the time. Yeah. We were literally sending out letters and emails, trying to get on people's shows, trying to get them on our show. We would call people and say, hey, can we pay you to mention us? And they'd be like, we don't even know what to charge. Okay. So for the listeners, that's our evolution. And then we meet Josh. And so, Josh, I'll let you take it off from here about how you do.
I just let you go. I think that was great. That's like every person who comes into our world.
That's the example of what not to do.
Oh, yeah, there you go. It's funny, though, is that so we've worked with over 1,500 podcasters at this point. Every single time I talk to them, they have two big questions. They're like, okay, when do I get sponsors? Right. And how do I get 1 million listeners? And I go, those are the two wrong questions. That's the problem. If you are beating your head against the wall over and over and over again, it's 99% of the time it's because you're asking the wrong question. And if you look at media, so I'm going to kind of do a big step back here and say, okay, let's look at social media as an example. Everybody is still wanting to become an influencer because they want to stoke their ego, whatever. They think it's going to make them millions of dollars. I know pretty much every influencer and like big influencer in these spaces, they don't make a lot of money, guys. I mean, you don't make a lot of money from Instagram. You don't make a lot of money from YouTube. What you can do is, it doesn't mean you can't make lots of money from it, but you don't make lots of money from it because you're approaching it the wrong way. The reason I like podcasting as a medium, so versus blog, social media, YouTube, all these different places, is that when people consume content from a podcast level, we're treating it like it's social media, and it's not. Podcasting is very, very different. If you want to compare it to anything, you actually need to compare it to live events. And when you look at the live event sector, you can pretty much copy everything that's been done in the live event sector and duplicate that in podcasting. And a lot of people don't realize that because they're trying to compare it to YouTube or TV or newspapers or social media. And it's not like any of them. It doesn't grow the same way. Like, people think that they're going to go out and start a show and they're going to get found. You don't get found organically with a podcast. It's the same way as if you were to go out and say, hey, I'm going to do a seminar. I'm going to have 500 people show up. And then so you go rent the building and you show up and you're like, okay, where are my people? Right? They're not here. And people look at it that way. And I try to use that example to help people realize, because 99% of you have probably done that exact same thing, right? Showing up to a webinar and you're like, oh my gosh, there's only 2 people coming and I was supposed to have 500 and I said 500. Yeah. Anyways, we've all done it. But what I can tell you is that if you treat it that way, you realize, oh, I have to fill those seats. And filling those seats can be done in many different ways. You can get people to come to it, but let me just put it to you this way. Have you guys ever been to like Grant Cardone's 10X event or any of these like big conferences where they have like 500 speakers come in?
Oh yeah. Been to conferences, never been one of his. Yep.
Yeah. So Grant Cardone's is a pretty good one. What I could like Podcast Movement. That's where Tanya and I went and hung out a couple months ago. They had like, what was it, Tanya? 300 people who came and spoke, probably more.
Yeah. In breakout rooms and main stages.
Yeah. And you look at that and you're like, if you actually understand marketing, the only reason they did that, they could have had 2 speakers, but the reason they did that is because every speaker has to promote it to their audience. That's part of the deal. And so that's how they're filling it up. It's called a syndication model. You're bringing a whole bunch of people together to promote one giant event because it benefits all of you. That's how podcasting works. That's how what we do works to get the growth side. But then let's use events as another example of this. If I were to ask somebody to sponsor my show, my podcast right now, let's just say McDonald's is like, hey, I'll sponsor you. They're going to use what's called a CPM model. It's a cost per mil or cost per 1,000 views of my content, right? That is garbage, guys. Please don't accept the CPM model. It's worthless. We're currently battling it out with Chase Bank right now, trying to get them to give up the CPM model because we're like, it's different. It's different because they're coming at us saying, oh, we'll give you $1 million for all these shows, but for each show, it's like $400, you know? And I'm going, not really worth it for the show. And you look at that and you say, okay, well, they're giving us $35 CPM and people battle it out over these pennies. And we're like, wait a minute, this isn't TV. This isn't social media. This isn't all these other things. Podcasting is very, very different. It's like the event. So we said, okay, when somebody sponsors an event, they don't just show up and get a booth, right? They pay a ton of money to come to those. We were looking at booths for one of these podcasting conferences. It was like $20,000 for like 10 square feet, right? Yep. And like $20K, right? So in my brain, I'm sitting here going, well, why don't we just do that exact same thing, but for podcasts? Like, because they're paying to have like 300 people walk by their booth. We're like, hey, give us half of that. I'll send 3,000 people past your booth and we'll evangelize you, and their numbers will actually perform better. And so the model has shifted that way, where we don't have to rely on these big wig companies who control budgets. We're like, hey, you're a small tech company trying to get real serious reach. How about you become my partner on this show? And we're going to evangelize you like crazy. That's one of our big monetization techniques, but that's just like one of 7 different ways you can monetize a show that's going to far exceed anything anybody else will tell you.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. A heck of a takeaway. Safety in the numbers, but it's amazing. And it hits actually what we sort of organically discovered ourselves. Like it wasn't a far step for us. It was a tiny step to say, okay, we have this podcast and somebody has the ideal customer at the end of that listenership that we need to get to. Right. And I think podcasting is the greatest way for that to happen. If you got a podcast on gardening, there are people who want to know just about gardening, and that, and I don't think there's any other type of ability to learn like that besides buying the book that you don't want to read, because like most of us are audible and visual and we'd rather do that. And especially if we're driving and things like that, podcast just fit every one of those so perfectly for the consumer.
Well, and what's so interesting too, what you're bringing up here, Michael, I love, because we watch a lot of people and they try to get people to come to their podcast from social media, right? I use this example all the time, and it's going to get a feed into your example, is that we all know the moment when you've had a really long day at work and you sit down, you turn the TV on, and then your spouse walks up to you and says, hey, can you do the dishes? There's like an instant like fire of, no, I do not want to do the dishes. Or maybe that's just me. I don't know. But we get that moment, right? Where we're like, oh, I don't want to do this. That is the exact same thing when somebody's on social media, they are sitting down to be entertained. And then when you throw your business content, they're like, oh my gosh, I've already dealt with work. That's why business content doesn't go viral, because people don't want that. They might want inspirational or entertaining business content. Most people are throwing their podcast on there and going, why is nobody coming over? My listener, I have like 10,000 followers on Instagram and nobody comes over to my podcast. It's because you're trying to take them from a movie theater and put them back in a cubicle, right? They don't want that. But what you're talking about is like the gardening concept, right? This is so much different. The only other medium that could be similar to this would be like YouTube, where you can actually have these co-branded partners or sponsors or whatever you want to call them, and you can build your content around what they're selling, right? So you can say, hey, you know what? BrandFace, we're just going to use you guys as an example. You can say, hey, it's being part of BrandFace is you need to write a book at some point. We don't write books for you. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about and show you and share with you how to write a book and everything. And we're going to bring on experts. And every episode, we're going to talk about, hey, if you're wanting to start today, go hire this book person, right? Or this publishing company or whatever. And when you do that, it's so much more organic because it's not like, hey, go to McDonald's and buy a McRib, right? Which is the campaign they're trying to get us to run, by the way. It's really funny. I'm like, how many times are they going to put that up and take it back?
It's supposed to be on its final tour.
Exactly. Yeah. For the time. They asked us to run commercials on our show for that. I'm like, no, nothing. I don't even like McDonald's. But anyways, I digress. Coming back to it though, is like, it's a whole different mode because they are already in education mode. It's like when you go to an event, right? And you're sitting there and the person pitches you, you've been all week long. You're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I totally need to have a podcast. And they're like, okay. And by the way, here's the best microphone. We're going to give it to you at a discount. And then you get it. It's everybody buys it. You can close 70% of the room that way. And you start to think that way, your show changes completely. Because you're not sitting here just going, oh, I'm just going to interview people or I'm just going to launch content and I'm going to post on social media and see what happens. It becomes actionable content. Like you're actually building a strategy around what you do. Like you mentioned gardening and you're finding, hey, I don't need 10 million people to listen to a gardening podcast. I need those 10 people who are sitting here going, I'm already buying tools. I'm trying to figure out where to get soil. I'm trying to do blah, 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 all these things with gardening. And your job is just point them in the right direction. Teach them how to use it and point them in the right direction. And they will love you for that. Business people in particular, those of you who have business related content, stop just regurgitating what everybody else is doing. Build your content around selling something and just watch what happens. You'll make a lot of money that way.
Oh yeah. It's that peripheral, right? Because you're never getting everything you need in one place. There's always what's next.
Right.
What's next, right? And that's good. So there's a question for you, Josh. What's next for you in Pantheon?
Ooh, what's next? This is where I get really excited. So if you have to reel me back in, please do. But we're on a run to own the podcasting industry because what's interesting, we've been looking at the industry as a whole. It's been around since 2004, guys. And a lot of you are going, I didn't even discover podcasts till 4 years ago. They've been around that long. It's kind of embarrassing how long the industry has been around. And the adoption rate has been honestly quite slow. And podcasting agencies are going to be like, no, it's growing like crazy. It's really not. I mean, there's only 4 million shows listed, which sounds like a lot, but versus like TV channels or TV shows, there's over, I think it's, 200 and something million TV shows. We got a long way to go, guys, with podcasting. So it's not saturated. I'm going to tell you that much. But we're looking at this industry, and the only reason why it hasn't scaled is there hasn't been enough money running through the industry. So what we're doing is we're actually going out and we're pumping a whole bunch of financial dollars into this space, hence the Pantheon, right? We're bringing a whole bunch of podcasters together, pooling resources. And instead of us saying, hey, go listen to BrandFace or go sponsor BrandFace for, $10,000, we're saying, hey, go sponsor these, 50, 100, 250 shows for 10, 20, $30 million. And we bring that much money in, then podcasters are then incentivized to build more content, increase their stick rate, that kind of stuff. That allows the industry to grow. So again, platform thinking is saying, hey, can we build the platform, own the demand, and then bring the supply? That's really what we have going right now. Bring podcasters together and saying, hey, let's make you money. My end goal of everything that we're doing is I want every client we have to have a self-funding marketing system. Because we train people saying, hey, start your podcast, but before you even launch, make enough money to pay for the podcast times 5. Pay for it, scale it, right? But then instead of taking that money and eating it, you take that money, you roll it back into growing your show or growing your YouTube channel or writing a book or whatever. And all of a sudden you've got this self-funding project. You never have to go, where's my next marketing dollar coming from? You're saying, hey, every quarter I'm getting another $50,000 that I could roll into trying some other marketing tactics. That's ultimately what we've built and are continuing to build for the people in the Pantheon, for example, just so that they can scale, they can grow and monetize all the way there.
Yeah, I love it. Those sponsors are really paying you to use that as leverage and launch pad to grow your business. It's incredible. I love the platform.
Well, it's complete win-win in every situation and necessary because, out of that 4 million that are podcasts now, I mean, the attrition rate's still outrageous. The fallout.
This is what's hilarious. I've had people come to me and they're arguing with me on this, and I just show them the iTunes data. It's really funny. They're like, yeah, but in the last 2 years since COVID hit, blah, 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 it's grown dramatically, right? So this is what's interesting. In 2019, there were 425,000 active podcasts. These are people who produced at least one episode in the last year. Okay, that's active podcaster. Okay, one episode in the last year. And there were, I think, 1.2 million shows. And then today, so this is being recorded in 2022. I almost forgot which year it was. In 2022, there are over 4 million active podcasts. There's been 4 million podcasts. So there's been a huge spike in people who started shows. But this is what's interesting. There are still only 425,000 active podcasts. There has been zero growth on active podcasting. And so there's this huge opportunity for people who are tapping into it because listenership growth has been growing by 10 to 20% a year, which is really, really good. That means we're on a really good upwards track. There's more supply and a lot less demand, and everybody's dropping out. I guarantee you by next year, we're going to be down to 325,000 active podcasts because everybody's going, oh, the competition is so high. I can't do it. And it's the best time. It's like when the stock market, like it's going right now, everybody panics. Like, it's on sale, man. Go buy as much as you can. Anyway, it's the same concept with podcasting.
I love it. That's such good stuff. Let's switch gears just a little bit, Josh. Tell everybody one thing that they would be surprised to learn about you.
Oh, that's a really good one. I'm a total nerd. I mean, that's pretty obvious, I guess, behind me. I'm very into Marvel, that kind of stuff. I'm trying to think what would be a really good one for you guys. I'm Mormon. A lot of people don't know that. So that's my religion. I'm very, very active in what I do with Mormonism. I spent 2 years down in Mexico serving a mission for my church. And that was a huge, I would say almost driver for my success because it allowed me to see poverty on another level. Because I was in a poor state down there and we were preaching the gospel, helping build homes and schools and things like that. And there was a lot of really fun stuff that was happening there from a personal level. But it was so interesting for me to watch that culture. You know, we had a lot of people who tried to start businesses down there, and then they'd have the cartel show up and say, hey, if you don't pay me 80% of your revenue, A, we'll kill you, but B, we will, we're going to kill your family and all this other crazy stuff. And then the government wasn't helping. And I remember looking at that just going, man, they don't have any opportunity. And when I came home, I was like, I will never squander that. And I haven't since because I'm like, we have all the opportunity out there. I can tell you that's really, I could say honestly a big driver of what I do still to this day.
That's awesome.
Oh, beautiful story.
That's awesome.
Sure is. Okay, one more question for you. If all our listeners have the freedom to visit anywhere in the world, which place would you recommend they visit and why?
Ooh, I mean, I will say Idaho because that's where I live. Because I'd love to meet you if you came out here. I think there's this.
It's one of America's best kept secrets.
It is. Idaho is honestly like, please don't move here. We don't need more people living here.
Just come visit.
But please visit whenever you want. We have one of the coolest. So we're in southeast Idaho. So we're an hour and a half from Grand Targhee ski resort, like 2 hours from Sun Valley. We're an hour and a half from Jackson Hole, an hour and a half from West Yellowstone National Park. There's all these really cool areas. And if you haven't seen it, it's well worth it. If you want to see a bear, this is the place to come.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful place. Definitely come check it out, but please don't stay.
I love that. I love that. Guys, if you had as much fun as we have, hit that subscribe button because we can bring more of Josh Tapp right to your ears.
Exactly.
We've had a good time with you here today, Josh. Thank you so much.
Well. Talking with you guys.
Yeah, no, it's been good to get to know you. I encourage everybody to go to pantheon.fm, hook up with Josh and his crew, especially if you have a podcast or you're thinking about getting into the podcast movement. They are the people there to go to talk to. So, Josh, thank you for your time as always, sir.
Appreciate the shout out, brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I throw one quick note out for you guys as we say goodbye?
Absolutely.
Sure. I'm just going to plug for you guys. This show is incredible. These two are amazing. Please leave a review. People always ask for this, but if you leave them a review, this is going to take it so much further. I promise you, if reviews don't come in, they'll quit at some point. We've worked with a lot of podcasters, so keep those reviews coming, right? I'm going to guilt trip you into doing this. Share this with a friend too. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for the shout out.
You bet.
And thank you everybody for listening to Be Bold Branding.
Brought to you by BrandFace, the only comprehensive personal brand building system across the globe.